Okay, so this is going to be a somewhat quick tutorial on how we can use Qualtrics and the embedded data functions within Qualtrics to fully randomize vignettes that we use in an experimental design so that we know that we have much more confidence that any differences we're observing between groups have nothing to do with the specific way we worded any of our statements in the vignette. So this actually makes it way more easy to write any sort of written material that you're going to present to people and sort of hide some sort of manipulation in, because normally you might have to really painfully deliberate over how do I make sure that the control statement and the experimental statement are saying and conveying all the same things, but just with this one slight difference. It's really hard to match them on all dimensions. And if you instead fully randomize everything, you don't quite have to try as hard to make sure that the first sentence in the control condition says basically the same thing as the first sentence in the experimental condition, but it's also different enough so that the participant won't realize it's the same thing, and so on for the second, third, fourth. You don't have to worry about that stuff quite as much. So our goal for this type of setup, again, is that we want to test the effect of manipulating a single variable, but within the context of some larger written passage or vignette. So this might look like having a person read two platform statements, and you're just interested in changing one thing to see, what that effect, the effect of that one variable is on people's judgment of political candidates. And that's the example we'll use in a second. But you can do other things like change. If you have a person read two job applications and you're interested in the effect of previous incarceration, so that's one specific variable that you're interested in the effect of, not all the other stuff that's going to go in the application. You can do the same thing with like descriptions of an event. You can describe two events and have one thing be different between the two conditions, and that's the one thing you're interested in. But you have to put other stuff in as well, because you can't just give each participant one sentence. You have to have the vignette, um, some buffer, some filler that surrounds it. But you want to make sure that that buffer, that filler, all the other content in the writing is not what's creating any significant differences across the groups. You want to make sure that's not getting in the way of your ability to draw conclusions. So for this, as I said, we want to be extra diligent here in this approach. We want to keep as much as possible consistent across our conditions. So we want it to be the case that our experimental condition and the control condition, the only thing really systematically different between the two is whether or not they were given the treatment, essentially, whether or not there was the presence or not of a specific statement or bit of information. And so for the example we're going to use here, you can apply this again to a number of different contexts, but we're going to work under this example for this demo. Let's say we wanted to see whether or not there's an effect of Asian sounding names on preferences for political candidates. So we want to see, is it the case that when people are voting for someone for office, they're less likely to vote for someone if they have an Asian sounding name? That's our hypothesis. Right, so we're going to use two different famous people as examples for this. You probably wouldn't want to do that in a real study, because you're also bringing in all the baggage of, do they know who Danny DeVito is here? Do they know who Simu Liu is? So really you'd want to use more generic names, but for the purposes of this, I didn't want to invent some stereotypical name. I'm using real people. So Danny DeVito is going to be our white sounding name, and we're going to use Simu Liu, hope I'm saying that right, as our Asian sounding name. And we want to see if just the presence of one of these names affects how people feel about a candidate. Okay, so first thing we do is we come up with two platform statements, right? This seems like the most intuitive approach here. So I wrote a platform statement here for Danny DeVito, and I wrote a platform statement over here for Simu Liu. And one thing we could do is just send this out, right? Give this to people, have them read one or both. We could do this in a between subjects or within subjects. So we could have each person randomly assigned to read one of them, see how they feel about that person, and then run the stats that way. Or we can have each participant read both of these and see how they comparatively feel, right? But we could just send these out as is and see what people say, because one of them says Danny, one of them says Simu, right? But you might notice the problem here is that there's all this other stuff in each of the platform statements. Now, I did try my best when I was writing these. These are from another study, and there's some more nuance in how things were constructed there. But the general idea was that these are kind of roughly equated, so that they're kind of describing the same thing. So the first statement here is going to describe why the person decided to run for office, and then it describes sort of their general goals, and then it says something about how they're going to work with people or how they're going to use their power, right? But the problem is if you sent one group this left platform and you sent one group this right platform and you found out that people tend to like one over the other, let's say they liked Danny DeVito's over Simu's, how do we know it's because of Danny DeVito's name, because it's a white sounding name? Or is it possible that it's just because of the other stuff in this content? Maybe I inadvertently wrote something here that is just more appealing to people than whatever was in the body of this other platform statement here. Right, so that's a big problem. It really limits our ability to say that what's actually making people like this one more is the fact that it's a white name, because there's other differences that are not sort of smoothed out or equated across these conditions. So how do we accomplish doing that? And I think this is something that becomes much easier in current with current technology like Qualtrics. This isn't something that was always really feasible in the study of psychology, where back in the day we had researchers using vignettes and platform statements that were printed on paper, and people were actually using pens and paper. It's a lot easier to fully randomize things these days, and let's see how we do that. So the first thing I want to do here is break up the platform statements into these like little sections here, right? So, and again, like I mentioned, each of these little sections or statements was kind of meant to accomplish the same goal. So the first one obviously is an introduction. It's a person letting you know who they are, and then they're letting you know that they're running. The second one on both sides here is the person describing why they decided to run. So they were dealing with COVID and it became clear to them that safety was a concern. Same thing over here. So an event happened that gave them inspiration to run. And then this other statement afterwards is about their overarching sort of goals if they were to be elected. And then finally, a little bit about how they would use their power or how they would accomplish those goals. What are the means that they would use, right? So I think this is an important first step. Is let's make sure that we have these sets of different statements that could essentially be swapped out for one another, right? They describe similar things, they convey the same sort of information, but but they're not like super specific. Like this here doesn't have anything about Danny DeVito in it, so I could just replace it with this one. They're not only similar in what they describe, so they'll convey the same sort of sense about that person, but they're also different enough that if a person was to read both of these statements, they wouldn't be like, this is weird. That like, why are they having me read the exact same thing twice? You have to make them different enough so that they don't get suspicious about, yeah, this is so similar that like this feels weird. Okay, so that's the general idea. We could go into like whether or not these are perfect pairings, but that's besides the point, because another thing I'm going to do in a second is simplify this even more. So let's also do this. Let's change this on the left side to blue, and let's change this to red. So we're going to have a blue set of statements and a red set of statements. So for each of these rows here, there's a one blue one and one red one, right? So we have the inspiration statement, we have a blue inspiration, and we have a red inspiration. We have a blue goal statement, we have a red goal statement, and we have a blue mean statement, and we have a red mean statement. Right? So I'm just using color coding to show that there's sort of one of each. Okay. And then to make this even easier to digest, we're going to replace these statements right now with just what they do, just to make this like sort of graphically easier to digest here. So we have blue inspiration, goal, and means, and we have a red inspiration, goal, and means. And our goal is to be able to fully randomize everything again, so that the only difference between our conditions is the main thing we're interested in, which is the name of the person. Also here, I didn't quite randomize in this PowerPoint the rest of the sentence where their name is introduced, but so this isn't quite optimal, but you could get around that as well and do other things. So we simplified the statements. We're just representing them using these little tags, And here's what we're ultimately going to try and accomplish. So what you'll notice here, these two tables, each row in the table is a different participant, and on the left, this left table here, this is going to be all the participants that are in the white sounding name condition. And on the right side, this is going to be all of the participants in the Asian sounding name condition. Okay, so we're obviously you'd want quite a few more than 12 if you're running a study, but again, this is just to simplify, kind of summarize our approach here and what we're trying to accomplish. So we have 6 in each condition, and the critical thing to notice here is that in each of these tables, we have every possible combination of inspiration, goal, and mean statements from these two groups, right? So here we have 3 red. Let me change my pointer. Okay, so here we have 3 red statements, all 3 from the red side, right? And here we have all 3 from the blue side, but we also have every combination in between. So we've got the red, red, blue. We got blue. Where's blue, blue, red? I guess I don't have every combination. I messed that up. But we do. The idea here is that we would have every single permutation of these different elements, such that if we're comparing between these two groups here, because we're randomizing everything, there's no reason to suspect that if there's a difference between these two groups, let's say that people tend to feel really good about this candidate, but they feel really poorly about this candidate, they're much more likely to vote for Danny DeVito than Simu. We could not, no one would be able to say, oh, it's because of the statements, the difference in statements you used in the Danny DeVito condition, right? You just use more positive or desirable statements there. No one would be able to say that because of the fact that we're randomizing everything here. We have complete equivalence across these two conditions in the statements people are seeing. The only real systematic difference here is whether or not they're seeing one name versus the other. Right? So this is our goal. Rather than starting with this approach where we just have these full vignettes, which is easy to do in some ways, right? But it kind of taking this easier approach and constructing them, just writing 2 and calling it a day, it comes at a cost because it really muddies up the conclusions you can draw from things. So while this seems easy at first glance, it might actually be easier to take this other approach of let's come up with paired statements like these and then fully randomize them so that whatever data we get back, if we see that one of the conditions actually seems significantly more positive or negative than the other, we know for a fact that it's only because of the one thing that was different between these two vignettes. Okay, so how do we go and accomplish this? So I'm going to switch over to Qualtrics and walk you through the process here. Okay, so you can accomplish this in sort of with two different setups, right? So you could do this as a between subject setup or as a within subject. So in other words, you could have it be that each participant only sees one of the 2 platform statements. So they're either going to see a Danny DeVito or they're going to see Simu Liu, and it's going to be randomized either way, but each person's only reading one thing. And then you're kind of drawing comparisons across participants or between subjects. Or you could set it up so that each person is reading 2 platform statements, and they're going to read one from Danny and they're going to read one from Simu. Okay, so we're going to start with how do we set it up between subjects? So if each person is going to read only one vignette, only one platform. And so right now we're in the survey flow over here. So here's what you'd see. The survey, you just click on the left, the survey flow button. If you've used Qualtrics, you probably already know where that is. But a couple critical things to point out, just because I'm going to be using randomizers and embedded data and everything, is that in the survey flow, everything happens in order. So this is essentially a process that every time the survey is presented to someone, Qualtrics is going to go through and say, I'm going to start here with this person. I'm going to go to the first thing on the survey flow and I'm going to execute that first thing. And then I'm going to go down the list, right? So one way you can, I used groups here just to help simplify and kind of organize the different steps we're going to take. And I actually think it could be beneficial for a lot of people to start by setting up the groups. So sort of like putting on paper, here's the process that people are going to go through before you start filling out, like here's the actual, randomizers, blocks, etc. So um, we we're starting with this high level of, we know that when the survey boots up, first we're going to randomize the name a person sees, because a person's only going to see one vignette in this, the way we're setting it up between subjects. So we want to randomize the name a person sees. Then we want to randomize their first statement. Then we want to randomize the second statement they see, the goal statement. And then we want to randomize the mean statement. So for each of these things, we want to make sure that they're seeing a random one. And then we want to finally show them the entire vignette. Right? So we're just assigning them random statements so that we have this random combination, and then we'll show them all of them together. Okay, so that's just the general sort of flow here, but how do we accomplish each of these steps? They're all going to be done in the exact same way. So let's just start with, how do we randomize the names? Okay, so what we're telling Qualtrics here is that when a person opens a survey, first thing you do is you go to this group, and then you do the first thing in this group, which is going to be randomized names now. And then we start with this randomizer. So you always want to make sure that you have this number here set correctly, which in this case we want it to be 1. So we're telling Qualtrics, randomly present one of the following elements below. So it's going to randomly choose something underneath this randomizer and present that to the person. But in this case, the way embedded data works, they're not actually being presented with anything. This is kind of stuff that happens behind the scenes, right? So there's these hidden variables that are going to be assigned per participant, but they're not going to see this stuff happening. This happens immediately when they load the survey. They won't even know what's going on. But what we're telling Qualtrics is, randomly either decide that for this person, their introduction statement is going to say, "Hi, I'm Danny DeVito," or their introduction statement is going to say, "Hi, I'm Simu Liu." Okay, so it's going to go through and say, pick one of these elements and assign that to the person. And then they're either going to have one candidate name or they're going to have the other. Okay, so that's basically, or I guess exactly, how these other parts are going to be set up as well. So once we have a randomized name, it's going to do this whole process, and then it's going to move down to the next thing in this group, randomize their inspiration statement. So we want to make sure that they have one of the two possible inspiration statements. So this randomizer is randomly going to present one of the following elements. It's either going to present them, again, it's not actually presenting, this word is slightly misleading in how we're using the randomizer. It'll be presenting it to their computer, not to them as a participant. But it's either going to include this one element of set the inspiration statement to "I was inspired to run because of X," or it's going to set their inspiration statement to I was inspired to run because of Y. So it's going to randomly assign one of these to the person, and therefore when it comes time for them to see an inspiration statement, it's either going to say this one or it's going to say this one. So these are essentially mirrors of what we did here. So we can just say that blue is X, red is Y. We're going to either have them see this one or this one, just like this. They're either going to see this statement or this one. I just put much more simple ones in the Qualtrics just to highlight that the process without focusing too much on this irrelevant content. Right? So they're either going to see one or the other. We can continue down doing the exact same thing. So after we randomize their inspiration statement, it's going to go down to the next thing. We want to randomize their goal statement. So they see a random goal statement as well. So randomly present one of the following things. Either assign their goal statement to "my goal is to do X," or assign their goal statement, "my goal is to do Y." Again, when you're actually setting up this type of study, you don't want the statements to be this similar. You'd probably word them a bit more differently, as I did sort of in these examples. But the point is they're conveying the same information in different ways, and we're randomly assigning them. And finally, we're going to do the same exact thing for the mean statement. So it's going to go through each of these things. It's going to randomly give them a name, randomly give them a first statement, randomly assign them a second statement, randomly assign them a third statement, and then finally we want to show the block that is going to contain all of these statements, which I have not shown you how to do yet. So far, everything that's happened up till this point, the participant hasn't seen anything. This all happens immediately when they load in. It's just assigning them these variables. Just like when a participant walks into the lab, we're going to assign them to either an experimental or control condition. They don't know which one they're in. We don't say you're an experimental or you're a control. That happens behind the scenes. Qualtrics is also just assigning things behind the scenes. Also, I made an error here. This should be over here. So we'll say means. How did I set this up? Means statement is equal to I will accomplish my goal by doing X, or means statement will be set to I will accomplish my goal by doing Y. So that was just a little error in how I typed this up. But in each case, we have the name of the embedded data field, right? And then we're setting it to this value. So this is how we'll reference it. We'll say show the mean statement, and then this is what will show up later. And so let me show you how to do that now, because after we randomize all of these, we want to show them to the participant. So I'm going to hit apply in the bottom corner, and then let's go back to the survey builder itself. So we're just going to be looking at the between subjects vignette for right now, because that's what we're showing. So we are just showing one platform per participant, and here's a nice and easy way that we can insert the embedded data in through this piped text feature. So piped text, I guess it's called this because it's just piping text in from somewhere else. It's like pulling it from another location and inserting it here. So it's not that we're manually typing it in, it's going to retrieve a certain value from another place. In this case, the hidden variables that we assigned when the participant loaded the survey. So super easy to do is we can just click pipe text, right, and pipe text from a embedded data field. Okay, so and then we pick which embedded data field. We're going to do, first thing is the introduction statement. Okay, so we just click on that. Oh, well, you have to hit insert after. So embedded data field, hit the drop down. We're going to hit introduction statement, insert. And then it puts this little strange little tag, this block of text here. Just so you're aware, you don't always technically have to use this button and then go to these drop downs. This is a good way to find what the tag is for the embedded data that you've set. But basically, anytime Qualtrics encounters this specific block of text, it's going to replace this with the embedded data that is titled introduction statement. Okay, so if you want, if it's easier for you, you can always just use this pipe text button and do it manually. But once you've inserted this for the first time, if you want to just put this somewhere else, you could copy and then add new question, text graphic. You could paste it somewhere else. It'll do the same exact thing. Qualtrics really only cares about what this label is, or what this chunk of text, this tag, and using the drop downs here is just a way of figuring out what it is and inserting it. Okay, so we're going to get rid of this block. Also important to point out is that you can have this pipe text not just be in the question, the body of a question, but also in the answers. So you can put it into a bunch of different places. If we click on an answer here, we can go insert pipe text, embedded data field, introduction statement. So if you're using embedded data for other purposes, you can also do some cool stuff where you have sort of variable responses that people can select. But back to what we're doing. So we already randomized the statements. Now we're just trying to display them. So we just set in the introduction statement. Easy. Right? Now we just want to put the other statements in. So let's go embedded data field. Inspiration statement. We want that to come after the introduction. Okay, add another space. Let's just throw the other ones in as well. Inspiration, we'll put the goal statement. One more space. And then we're also going to have it insert the means statement. And this is how it's going to look to us. This looks really messy, looks like a bunch of gibberish. But when Qualtrics reads this first statement, it's going to say, what is the introduction statement assigned to for this person? I'm going to paste that in here. It's going to say, what is the inspiration statement set to? I'm going to paste that in here. What is the goal statement set to? I'm going to paste that in here. Same thing for the means. So let's see how that looks. We're going to hit publish. I don't even know if you need to hit publish before you preview or not, but we're going to now preview it and see what happens. So here we see that it's definitely working. It's putting out actual text and not those complicated tags here. And what we'll notice as we restart this several times is that it's completely randomizing everything. So in our outcome of our survey, in our data output that we're getting, all we would need to look at if we're splitting people up into experimental and control is we just look at which introduction statement they got, and we can split them into two groups just based off that. So this will actually be output into our data as a column, so it'll let you know in the output which one of these did the person get assigned. And then we can split up Danny DeVito people into control group and Simu Liu people into experimental group and run the analyses that way, because everything else is randomized and we don't really care about it. But let's test this, make sure it is in fact randomizing. So we see one name, we see Y, and then we see Y. Okay, so 3 Ys. Let's see, let's make sure it's not only giving us that. So same name, but now we see YXY. Same name, YXX. Danny DeVito this time, XXX. So we're seeing all these different combinations, right? So that we didn't type any of these out. It's just giving us, it's actually generating different statements for us. And because everyone's seeing something different, something completely, essentially unique, we're going to expect that across conditions, again, everything that every combination of these statements that someone saw in the Danny DeVito condition, someone else saw in the Simu Liu condition. So again, if we just look across these, like this top row here, if we're trying to compare this person's attitude towards this person's attitude, and it turns out that this person is happier than this person or likes the candidate more, they saw all the same stuff, but they just saw different names. So that's the only thing that can be driving this difference. And the same logic extends to the entirety of the conditions, because everything is randomized and equated. Okay, so we see that this randomization does in fact work, and it is really actually simple to set up just for a between subjects setup. But how do we do this if we want a within subject setup? So we want to set it up so that each person, instead of seeing one of these things, one row here or one row here, whatever it is, they're seeing two different platform statements, one for each of the candidates. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is, and in fact, first I'm going to move this whole group up above so that when we run a test, the first thing we're going to be showing is the stuff that we're working on here. So remember, survey flow goes in order. So now we just put all the stuff we just did at the bottom. We're not even going to get to that. So let's start up here. Let's see what we're doing. So the first thing you'll notice is that we're using the same basic structure that we did before. So the first thing we want Qualtrics to do is to randomize which inspiration statement will be associated with each candidate. So it's a little bit different here. It's not which inspiration statement is the participant going to see, because they're going to see both of them. It's more about which candidate is the statement going to be paired with. All right, and then same thing for all of the other statements. And then finally, we want to show both vignettes. Okay, so let's start with randomizing the very first statement. You'll also notice here that we don't have the randomize the names, because we're not randomizing which name they see. We're showing them both candidates. So we're doing this a little bit different in that we're hard coding the names to certain blocks. So we're going to have one block that's within subjects Simu. We're going to have one block within subjects Danny. And in these blocks, we're going to automatically assign the names. So in fact, we'll type, hi, my name is Danny DeVito. And then we'll type, hi, my name is Simu Liu. And we'll insert the embedded data. Once we get everything randomized, we'll insert it right after these things. But just pointing out that instead of randomizing names, we're going to use the names as a sort of anchor point. We're going to start with names and just randomize everything that follows them. Okay, so let's go back to the survey flow. We'll start with this first statement here. The first thing we're randomizing is the inspiration statement. And it's a pretty similar setup here, but you'll notice that we're still randomly presenting one of the following elements. So it's either going to do this, it's either going to execute this block here, or it's going to execute this block. Again, it's happening all behind the scenes. Participant isn't seeing anything, but they're going to be assigned these statements behind the scenes. So it's either going to set Danny's inspiration statement to X, and then Simu's inspiration statement to Y, or it's going to do this other thing, this other block, where it sets Danny's inspiration statement to Y and Simu's inspiration statement to X. So we're just a little more explicit here. We're just outlining the two possible combinations, because it's either going to be the case that Danny gets X or Simu gets X, right? And we just put also, it's either going to be the case that Simu gets Y or Danny gets Y. We're just highlighting, here's the two possible combinations of this first statement. Okay, so again, randomly present one of the following elements. It's going to pick one of these, and they're either going to get Danny with X or they're going to get Danny with Y, and vice versa. Right? And we're going to do the same thing for the other groups. So now we want to randomize the goal statement that they're going to see. Same thing. We're going to randomly present one of the following to the participant. Again, not really to them, more to their computer, because they're not going to see this. We're assigning them this condition behind the scenes. So we're either going to have it be that Danny's goal statement is X, or that Danny's goal statement is Y, and vice versa. Because if Danny's goal statement is X, we know that Simu's goal statement is going to be Y. And if Danny's goal statement is Y, we want Simu's goal statement to be X. So everything within this block, this embedded data right here, is going to happen at the same time. Right, so it's going to choose one of these. These will both happen simultaneously, or these will both happen simultaneously. Right, and same thing with mean statement. We're just doing the exact same thing here. We're just changing this wording, right? So they're either going to see that Danny's mean statement is X, or his mean statement is Y, and vice versa. If Danny's is going to be X, then Simu's is going to be Y. If Danny's is going to be Y, then Simu's is also going to be X. So we're completely counterbalancing who gets which of these statements. And then finally, we want to show both of the vignettes, because we're doing it within subjects. Each person is going to see each thing. But we also, while we're at it, while we're trying to completely counterbalance and randomize everything, let's also, just make it that each candidate, that we're randomizing the order which people are encountering these platform statements, right? Because we also don't want it to be the case that if people are seeing both of the platforms, that one of them is always coming first, because we know in psychology that there's primacy and recency effects. So if it turned out to be the case that we always showed Danny and then Simu, and then people were more likely to vote for or like Danny, someone could just be like, oh, I don't think it has anything to do with the names you used. I think it's just because you're always showing Danny first and people like the first candidate they see. So we're also randomizing the order that they're seeing these vignettes, these platforms, so that we're ruling that out as a possibility as well. Everything is randomized now, and the only thing we're paying attention to when we're running analyses is which name are they actually seeing. Okay, so how is this going to look once we run this? Or how do we actually, before even doing that, how do we set it up in the survey builder? So we have the flow here where we're randomizing each of the statements, and then we're showing the blocks in a random order. Because again, here what's different than the other randomizers we've used is that we're randomly presenting two of the following elements. So each participant is going to see both of these, but this randomizer is going to randomize the order that they see them in. Sometimes it'll show Danny first, sometimes it'll show Simu first, but it's always going to show two things, and there's only two things in here, so we'll never have a person not see one. Okay, so let's go back to the builder and see how we set this up. So remember, this time we're starting with the name rather than having, in the between subjects version, we had a field that would insert the randomly assigned name. They're going to see both, so we don't need to randomly assign names. We're just going to randomly assign what goes with each name. So after this, hi, my name is Danny DeVito. Let's go ahead and insert pipe text. We're going to insert inspiration statement Danny. So whichever inspiration statement was assigned to him, we're going to put right there. Right? And this is pretty similar to what we did for the between subjects. So now we're going to do goal statement that was assigned to Danny. We're going to insert that so they see that next. And then we're going to insert the means statement that was assigned to Danny. Right there. Okay, and then that's going to comprise his whole platform statement right there. We're going to do the same thing for Simu. So pipe text, embedded data field, whichever inspiration statement was assigned to Simu. We're going to insert whichever goal statement was assigned to Simu. And then we're going to insert whichever means statement was assigned to Simu. All right, and we'll hit publish again. I don't know if this is superstition, but I always do this before I preview things. And just as a, again, a reminder, what we did here is we switched the order now. So now we're going to see the within subject stuff we just worked on, rather than, I still have the between subject stuff in here, but it's going to come afterwards. So we'll just quit out of the preview before we even get to that. So what we're going to see when we boot this up is none of this is going to get shown to us, this embedded data stuff. So it's going to do this automatically. Boom, boom. It's going to assign all these things randomly. It's going to randomly assign one of these. It's going to randomly assign one of these, randomly assign one of these, and then it's going to randomly present both of these. So the first thing we're going to see is one of the platforms, and then we're going to see the other one. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so here we see Simu first, and what we're going to notice here is that if we're seeing X for him in the first statement, we're going to see, we should expect to see Y for Danny. If we're seeing Y for him in the second statement, we should expect X for Danny. And if we see X for his third statement, we should expect to see Y. So right now we see Simu Liu. We should see the exact opposites of everything for the next one. We should expect to see Y, X, Y. And let's see if that works. So now we see Danny DeVito. We see Y, X, Y. All right, we can run it one more time and just see, make sure it's actually changing things. So now we again see Simu first, but now we're seeing X, Y, Y. So next time we should expect to see Y, X, X, right? So let's see what Danny has. Danny, Y, X, X, right? So we're seeing all these different combinations of possible statements. Here we see X, Y, X. Now we're going to see Y, X, Y. See? So everything is fully counterbalanced this way. So we've effectively accomplished this setup here. Now if we send this out to people, there's no reason to suspect that if people on average like Simu Liu as a candidate more, there's no reason to suspect that, oh, it's because this statement right here was always with Simu, and this is a more, whatever Y is here is just more desirable. It just sounds better. It's more compelling. People want to vote for a candidate that does Y, or they were inspired because of Y, rather than they were inspired because of X. Because there's no reason to suspect that now. Every time we see Simu, he's paired with different stuff. Right, so sometimes he gets Y, sometimes he gets Y. Alright, well, this isn't proving my point. Okay, sometimes he gets X, right? It's being randomly determined here. The only thing we're going to pay attention to is people that got this name and people that got the other name. And this just really strengthens the extent to which we can draw conclusions about our variable of interest, and it also just makes it so much easier to write these statements too, because it's less important. Again, if you set something up like this, there might be concerns over, is this statement here really conveying the same information? Is it leaving the same impression as this statement over here? Because if they're not, that's a problem with equating these things, and especially so if you're setting it up like this, where one person is just getting one thing, one person is getting the other. But when we're randomizing everything, it doesn't even quite matter if this says the same exact thing as this, because again, we're just going to fully balance it out. Even if this is slightly more appealing than this is, some people are going to see the appealing thing for Danny DeVito, and then some people are going to see the unappealing thing for Danny DeVito. So they'll kind of balance each other out. They'll kind of counteract each other statistically. Right, so it just makes it easier to write the statements. Obviously, you should still put effort into making them roughly equated, but like even if you don't, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to diminish your data or your conclusions here. So I just think it's something you have to stress out about less. Okay, so hopefully that was useful. Wherever this ends up, if I end up sharing this somewhere, it will also have a link, or maybe the file, so that you can import this survey into Qualtrics and play around with this stuff yourself, or just kind of again see how it was done and maybe change some things to see if you can plug in your own values and make this work for your own setup. So I hope this was helpful, and thanks for watching. I don't know if I have anything to gain, but all right. Thanks.